Is cutting people off a sin, or is it a biblical wisdom? Are you ungodly for walking away from people? Does love mean access no matter the cost? Did Jesus teach boundaries or blind forgiveness? So, our topic for this episode is cutting people off a sin? Hi, beloved. This is Doc Gilbert, and I'm a Christian clinical counselor and psychologist. So, hi guys, how's your weekend? So, welcome to our new episode today. So, for me, like we went out and meet our friends yesterday, and it was really a deep connection where we use cards to really get to know one another deeply, and it was a sacred moment for me, especially when I get to know my loved ones, my dearest ones, in a deep level. And, in vulnerability, we get to experience real connection. When we get to be authentic with someone, we feel safe. That's one of the most spiritual things that you can do, and yeah, so it was a healing moment, to be able to share a part of us, our grief, our emotional experiences, our stories, and well, these brothers of mine, we've been walking for many years, and now they are adults, professionals, and they have their own healing journeys, in their own respective ways. And it was such a beautiful moment, uh, for me to be able to connect with them in that level, and of course, my wife was there, and yeah, we were able to minister and connect with one another. And that's my hope, my prayer, my longing, my vision for the Christian churches, that the bride of Christ would become a safe place where anyone can be vulnerable, within their own safe groups. One can be their authentic and truest selves, being able to express their weaknesses, their triggers, their sin, their past, without judgment, without fear of being rejected or shamed upon or, abandoned. And of course, in an ideal world, that's what I hope it to be. But still, the sad reality among churches today that we are not yet there. The churches are not yet there. For them to be able to be authentic in that level. And talking about that level, because it requires a person to have his or her own self-awareness. Without self-awareness, without their own personal healing, it's impossible, to achieve that level of vulnerability, because it takes inner work, to be able to see that, to be able to see our own trauma and how it impacts us today, even though we are already Christians, to see our weaknesses because it has its own shame and guilt. It's natural for us to use our own psychological defenses in order for us not to see that. We have our own ways to protect ourselves, just to keep us away from anything that's uncomfortable, that's, unusual, that's unchristian in a way. So, yeah, just sharing with you, some of the stuff that I've had, this past days, especially with this bonding, with these dearest ones. And well, talking about friendships, relationships, yes, we're gonna transition, talking about this one of the most controversial topics, which is cutting people off. For many years, I usually hear it from some friends and even most of the times from my own counselees, when they they're thinking about cutting off people in their lives, it usually entails guilt, am I a bad Christian? Am I a bad person? Am I a bad friend or partner? So there are really forms of guilt coming up. And of course, there are also shame where, they believe these statements come that say, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad friend, I'm a bad Christian. Why am I cutting off these people? Given the fact that we have good memories, that they have been a blessing one way or another, in this season of their lives, they've made a difference, they were there and they listened. So there are like really some forms of rehearsals, talking about what made these specific persons, uh, what they became a blessing in that season of their lives. And of course, given the fact that there is a Christian doctrine that says, you must forgive one another. You must, forgive their trespass as God has forgiven you. But yes, just like what I have discussed regarding the difference between forgiveness and restoration, we know that forgiveness is not the same with restoration. We can forgive a person but not restore the relationship, that there would be no same amount of trust, there would be no same amount of bonding and closeness. So that's the painful reality that one must grieve, you know that the relationship would not be the same. So, but for those people that it's not discussed in their own churches, even in their own family of origin, boundaries not thought upon, boundaries were already crossed, has always been crossed in the family, so these are some of the reasons why there's guilt and shame in terms of cutting people off, in terms of the belief about boundary in the family of origin, the teaching among the churches, and the absence of that, beliefs in social media, in friends, in peers, in some Christian theology or doctrines, I mean. So, yes, it fuels this guilt, this shame among these people, that even if the relationship is actually already one way, and that this person is already feeling burnout, or the relationship is really toxic and abusive and is harming the mental, emotional, and overall well-being of a person, then they feel stuck because of these certain beliefs that they are bad Christian, bad friend for not cutting off people, in their lives, And yes, there are also some levels of cutting off. The severe level is like unfriending, blocking, and not really meeting physically with this certain people. And for some, like grieving this lost relationship, this ambivalence that even though they don't have like conflict or major fights, but there's no initiative, no same amount of closeness, there's no like agency in terms of connecting with one another. So like there's different levels of cutting off, but certainly for some and many people, especially if it's harmful, toxic, abusive in terms of dynamics, those are actually traumatic for any person, and it would harm the mental and emotional health of anyone, being in this kind of relationship. So there is no better way but to cut off this kind of people in their lives. So, yeah, so we're going to talk about, in terms of biblical perspective, coupled it with the psychological wisdom, in seeing what does it mean to cut off someone, and in terms of the biblical and psychological perspective, and why is it important, of course, being a Christian, as a Christian, Why do we need to set boundary? In order for us to honor God, to honor ourselves, to honor the calling, the mission that God has bestowed upon us. Why is it important? So, we have to first distinguish between, what is boundary and what is unforgiveness. Of course, as I discussed it with one of my episodes, unforgiveness is not forgiving the mistake that a person does, and you know, uh, burying and feeling and sitting in continuously with the anger, the hurt, the disappointment, and it creates this kind of resentment. So the unforgiveness is about the not letting go of the mistake that this specific person did to you. Okay? But boundary is about setting limitation in a relationship in order to protect oneself and in order to protect the relationship. But most importantly, it's about keeping yourself safe, healthy, and secure. Okay? So when we look at the Bible, and even psychologically, boundaries are actually limits and it's not rejection. So when we set limit by, for example, keeping our distance, maintaining our physical uh, distance from a certain person, like blocking of their social media, archiving their messages, or muting their posts or my day, you know, in that way, you're actually protecting yourself from not harboring much anger, much frustration, much disappointment. Okay? And in that way, you're also honoring that person because you're not harboring and intensifying this kind of anger, and also you are making the relationship healthy. Okay, so setting that distance protects your heart, because it protects you from any form of revenge or hatred, because when anger is piled up, it becomes hatred. It could go towards aggression when a person could seek a revenge, whether physical attack, verbal attack, gossiping, so boundary will help you to protect yourself from that. Okay? So forgiveness is all about releasing bitterness, letting go of the mistake that a person did upon your life, but it does not mean access. Okay? Time and time again, as I repeated to one of our videos here, that forgiveness does not mean restoring the same closeness, restoring your trust with this specific person. So forgiveness means releasing, letting go of what this person did to you, and extending the forgiveness that God has extended to you to this person. But it does not mean that you're going to open up your life again, that you're going to be vulnerable again the same way before. Okay? And even in the scripture, many verses shows that it's very important to guard our hearts. So biblical wisdom calls upon discernment, not blind tolerance or harm. And when we look at Jesus, he actually protects himself by physically distancing himself from the religious people. When there was a time that the Pharisee, the religious leader, asking God, "Are you the Son of God?" Then Jesus did not answer actually. And in that way, that's a form of boundary because he knows that no amount of reason could convince this Pharisee or leader about his identity as a son of God. And there were times that the religious leaders, soldiers, were seeking him to arrest him. But because it wasn't time to be arrested, he physically distant, he ran away, from this place in order to protect himself at that moment. And there were also times that he went out, and separated himself from the disciples, just have a solitude moment with the Father. And in that way, that's also like a form of, distance and boundary. Okay. So Jesus demonstrated that, that he guarded his heart, in order not to, like poison it even more by the unprocessed anger or hurt or disappointment. Okay? And love can exist even without proximity. So many from my counselees, I usually hear, that in order for them to express a certain love, for example, uh, towards their toxic parents, they need to be there physically. They need to hear what they need to say. They need to be in their physical presence. And, that's wrong. Actually, being with toxic people in a same room with proximity could really hamper and harm your mental health, even more damaging the relationship and making your relationship with this specific people more toxic and unhealthy. And you are actually enabling them, to uh, make this abuse continuously happen to you, like in a way, you are enabling them to sin. And of course, the sin done against you, it's not equally helpful. It's harmful for you. It will attack your identity, affect your health, and even your physical health. So there are a lot of studies that traumatic experiences and, let's say, narcissistic abuse in relationships have long-term physical health issues like cancer, diseases, illnesses, because it makes the organs of our body inflamed. And when it is inflamed, our immune system decreases. It is affected. So there is no other way but to really limit the proximity in order to maintain this respect that you have for these people. Because of course there would come a time for some, for many, that they would react and they would attack aggressively using words, just like how these toxic people use words against you. And yeah, one can choose compassion, love, respect, while maintaining necessary distance. Okay? So, second point, of course, I just like what I've exampled from the first point. Actually, Jesus modeled healthy, distance. And, just like what I said, Jesus actually withdrew from environments that made him feel unsafe. He stepped away from crowds, from leaders, from toxic people, when hostility is actually increasing and has been escalated. And in that way, Jesus was able to protect himself physically, mentally, emotionally. Of course, there is a right timing for him, where he would subject himself to be arrested when Judas betrayed him. So it wasn't the right time for some of those moments. Okay? And even he did not chase unrepentant hearts. So, Jesus allowed people to walk away, people to reject him, because that's a respect. Jesus was respecting their boundary because God has created us with our own free wills. And those people who would reject his truth, he could not do anything about that. Um, he could not force them to believe him. The only way he can do, on handling this is to let them, respecting their free will, whether they want to believe in Jesus or not. Okay? And also, love did not mean constant exposure. So Jesus remained loving without subjecting himself to ongoing harm. Does it mean when he confronted these Pharisees and, maintained this boundary, that he did not love these people? In the contrary, no. He actually loved these people by maintaining his boundary, from them. even by confronting them, because sin must be confronted, abuse must be confronted. And maybe in that way, these people would wake up and chose to be repentant, chose to be accountable. But we can see in the scripture that they did not. Uh, and also, some of those moments where Jesus became silent, where he was distant, were actually intentional. So Jesus chose restraint instead of engagement. And and that shows the level of emotional regulation that he has, how he has control, knowing it's not time yet, to speak, or even to reveal that he is the son of God, or to do some certain miracle or confrontation. So I can only imagine how secure Jesus was, to have that kind of control, composure, self-regulation. And that's also a form of healthy distance. You know, uh, in that way, he was able to not just fulfill his mission, but be the person for a certain people, uh, by maintaining his boundary. Okay? So also boundaries preserved his mission work. Healthy distance allowed him to remain focused on God's purpose. We can see many times that he did not heal all of the people. He did not cast demons, to every people that he's gonna meet. He did not do miracles to all the people out there. Of course, he has physical limitations. One, we know that he is also a 100% biological human being. So he is limited physically. He gets tired. He gets hungry. He needs space. And in that way, he was able to fulfill God's mission. Because, if he did not have boundary, he would be burned out. He would experience compassion fatigue. And ultimately, there would be vicarious traumatization, where all of the stress and negative emotions would pile up. And that's, in its sense, a traumatic event to any person. So it escalates from stress to compassion fatigue to burnout to vicarious traumatization. Those are like the escalation of unprocessed emotion and stress in helping people. So imagine if Jesus did not have boundaries, then he would not be able to fulfill his mission, even the death on the cross. Because on the early part of his journey, he would burn out and quit. Okay? So this boundary would help us to focus on what matters most, what we priority in our schedule, in our time. And of course, people who would be unrepentant, unwilling to work out conflict with you, unwilling to change their behaviors, or unwilling to just be there and have empathy and be mutual in terms of give and take and accountability, then it would be wise to set boundary from these people. And it does not mean that you're sinning against God. Okay? And it does not mean that you're a bad Christian or a friend. You're just protecting yourself in order to fulfill God's mission also for you. The point number 3, our mental health is God's stewards upon us. It's not a sin. Okay? Our well-being is a God-given responsibility. That's why there is a verse that says, love yourself as you not love your neighbor. So imagine, how can we love others if we do not love ourselves? So the beginning of this kind of love starts on how we take care of ourselves. We honor our boundary, we respect our needs, and we meet them. And taking care of our mental emotional well-being says a lot about self-love. Okay? And in that way, we are actually honoring God. In a culture where many are actually honoring performance, helping others, sacrificing for others. And, well, many actually do not have this wisdom with regards to what's the difference between self-love and being selfish, or uh, sacrifice versus, abuse. Well, with uh, being selfish, you are not honoring, respecting, and meeting others' needs. All you see is your needs are important, are more important than the others' needs, and you violate that, you shame that, you neglect that, you abuse that. So that's selfishness. But self-love is, it's there's mutuality where you see that the needs of others are important just like yours. Okay? You put value not just to the needs of others, but ultimately to yours. You honor, respect, and even meet your own needs, and you value that. You respect that. So that's self love. And when we have self love, we are actually honoring God. In retrospect, we are dishonoring God when we do not care about ourselves. When we do not rest, when we do not meet our own needs, when we use toxic and unhealthy copings, when we allow others to abuse us, when we do not have boundaries, we do not take care of ourselves, we are actually dishonoring God. And that's the reality, okay? So self-love is honoring God, okay? And enduring abuse is not faithfulness. I know I've discussed that to one of the episodes that we have here. So God does not require suffering through manipulation, through deception, through lying, through harming your well-being. You know, and yes, I condemn all these ways, these beliefs that says you must endure the abuse because you just need to be faithful. You just need to be forgiving. Because I always say to my counselor, it's not about forgiveness, but it's about calling out the abuse and setting boundary, taking care of yourself, cutting off these people in order to protect yourself from further harm and trauma. Okay? And yes, boundaries actually prevent further injury. So distance can stop repeated emotional, psychological, and spiritual damage. If you're far away and not there physically, and if you have like set these parameters not to see any posts or gossip or, see any messages that could trigger you, that could prevent further injury. So I always say to my counselee that think about a fire, a burning fire, a fire. So imagine if you are removing one charcoal at a time, then the fire would lessen in its intensity, right? So the same is true with boundaries. When we get to set one boundary at a time, the intensity of the one and the trigger could be lesser. And eventually, as you set all the boundaries, that there would be no triggers. Like imagine a wound that is continuously being pricked, then the wound would not be able to fully heal because the wound is continuously opened up. So the same is true with boundaries. That could help your wound, you to heal continuously. Okay? So choosing safety aligns with love. When we protect ourselves, we allow healthier love, toward others. Our bitterness, our resentment, or our unforgiveness would not increase, because we are not constantly bombarded, attacked, or shamed, through many ways that these toxic people do, directly or indirectly. We can begin to heal and process one negative emotion at a time without, the possibility of adding another negative emotion in our consciousness or unconsciousness. Okay? So, in conclusion, cutting off people is a boundary, and sometimes it is necessary, and it does not automatically means it's a sin. Okay, so just like what Jesus did, when he cut off people, so it's for your safety, it's for your sanity, it's for your own healing. This boundary would set yourself a protective arm in order for you not to be attacked, in order for these negative emotions not to pile up anymore, and in order for you to begin deeper in your own healing and growth in the process. Okay? And yes, it is not automatically a sin. So it is different from running away from accountability, responsibility, and transparency. In terms of resolving conflict or changing, but it's all about, seeing the characteristic of these people that are not changing and is toxic and unhealthy to you. And even noticing those symptoms uh, in your identity, in your perception of yourself, in your bodily reaction, and the harm and the negative impact that it is already making to you. So your well-being matters more than maintaining and having this kind of relationship, beloved. So that's it. I hope you've learned something. So if you have like insights, reflections, awareness, so please comment down below and don't hesitate to share it with me. And if you are new here, please do subscribe in this YouTube channel. And in that way, you are helping the Ministry of Intimacy Philippines to grow and expand the healing to many people. Okay? So please don't forget also to share this video so that many people could listen to this. Okay? So hope to see you in our next episode. Hanggang sa muli.